Welcome to Tanakh Talk. I am your host, William Hall, broadcasting live from Kingsland, Texas, USA, with another episode of Rabbi Moshe Shulman's One for Israel. I almost got to have the title. Debunking, whatever, with One for Israel. Thank you, Rabbi Shulman, for joining us and for tackling this huge process that you're working on right now. Thank you so much.
Just so that people know, it's actually their 10th video that they make, basically attacking Judaism itself, but this one specifically attacking the rabbis. Right. We've had 3 sessions so far, basically with a lot of background material. Part of it establishing the fact that Christianity, at least New Testament Christianity, has many ideas and concepts as far as the relationship to women that Judaism does. We're going to sprinkle that out through here. Today, we're going to start and get to what they actually have in their tape, the actual video itself. We're going to go to the video. There's like 30 quotes or so. We're going to go through each and every one. We're going to dissect each and every one, go back to the sources when available. We're going to point out cases where they use people they consider rabbis that aren't really important people. We'll deal with that as we go along. Okay. Before we start, I want to remind you of something that I mentioned before, but it's important to remember about this, from Dr. Michael Brown, who is a very well-known Christian evangelist, specifically to Jews. He's of Jewish background, and both his parents were Jewish. And he wrote a book basically for Christians about anti-Semitism in the Christian church. And I believe he has another book that's coming out, which we're going to be quoting from one chapter specifically dealing with the Talmud. So this is what he writes to his fellow Christians, which would mean Eitan Bar and the people, the One for Israel, who wrote this, that they should really keep in mind when they are quoting things and, trying to, with a broad brush over all of Orthodox Judaism or created Judaism, stuff like that. We're going to find a lot of that is bogus to begin with. But, he gives a way of looking at it which should apply to them, but they don't. So let me just read this again because it's very important. How then should we view the traditional rabbis? How should we think about religious Jews? Some might be hypocrites filled with spiritual pride. Such people are found in every religion, and there certainly is something ugly and dangerous called Jewish supremacy. Some rabbis might be rabbis just because they think it's a good job. But many others are deeply sincere, like Paul. They might be faultless as far as legalistic righteousness is concerned. They may even live better lives than many of us. For I can, as he brings here from Romans, for I can testify about them that they are zealous for God, but the zeal is not based on knowledge. They are zealous to this very day. Let us not be so quick to judge and condemn. Okay. Now, his point, of course, is, since he probably knows more about the literature than anybody from One for Israel does and knows, and taken his time to look into it to see what the basis is, it's words of advice that One for Israel should have had. However, the fact of the matter is that's not really what the case is. As we go through the quotes, there's certain things that you're going to see about them that will tell you and indicate you how fraudulent and how libelous this is, and how anti-Semitic, and why I consider anti-Semitism. And I think people should. First of all, some of these are taken totally out of context. In fact, I don't know of a single one of them that I can think of offhand. Maybe when we go through, I will say, yeah, this is more in context. I don't know a single one of them that's taken in context, where you actually understand what the statement is being said from whichever rabbi it is, and understand where it's coming in, what it's about. Some will be so egregious, it's phenomenal. They attack one rabbi for just being something that's said in the Torah explicitly. We don't know. Now, some of them have no concept we don't know about. Some we can guess what it is because of what we know what I know from certain places in the Tanakh we're talking about. We don't know. Many times they say certain things that they claim that rabbis say, or they might take from certain rabbis who, we've mentioned before, that are not authorities, or in fact themselves are not reputable people, who say things that are actually the exact opposite of what we know from Jewish halakhic literature, legal literature, which says what you do. And we will show some instances of this where actually these particular people are saying things that are contrary to halakha. So to even claim that Jews are following something like that is not correct. Okay. One of the things they also do is ignore not just the context, but an understanding that many rabbinic discussions are based on theoretical constructs. What would happen if such and such a case happened? What would be the biblical law involved in that? Also, it should be noted that there are some of these things here that have already been handled by Jewish websites that deal with neo-Nazi material, which is basically, this is not much different than that. A Gil student has one out there you can look for. It's called The Real Truth About Talmud. And there's a number of books and stuff like that that are dealt with it, just going through each one of them in a fair way. Again, I mentioned Dr. Brown because he's basically the one I really know at the moment, who's a Christian who's actually done that. And he goes through many of these things in some of his stuff. And we're going to get some quotes from him also. It requires basically doing what they would want us to do for them as far as quotes are concerned, to be fair and honest and discussion about it. In fact, I'm going to have, towards the end of this, we're going to have a whole session or so where we're going to go through Christian history from the New Testament, early Christian sources, Middle Ages, early modern period, and just quote what Christians say about Jews, the outright anti-Semitism from people who are not talking, or people who are, unlike many of the people here who are unknowns or unimportant, many people who are important in Christian history all the time. Now, when we look at each one, there's a few things we say. Number one, there are different ways of presenting material that might be questionable. So if you see something in the Rambam, for example, Maimonides, who says something that you say seems strange, there's different ways of doing it. You can do it in a question, say, why is it that it's such a way? Or there's another way you can do it, which is what we see throughout their tapes. The venom and hatred in the presentation of what they say and the exaggeration of it is clearly something that we would expect is basically aping what I've heard from people who are older than me who were there, was what's going on in Nazi Germany and the lands where we were being persecuted at the time. This type of Jew hatred that was there. Now, what's important is not this, is rather than doing the kind of approach that Dr. Brown and many others advocate, they're trying to do something that increases hate and animosity between Jews and Judaism, especially in Israel, where I mentioned before, Israeli society has a delicate balance between the religious and the non-religious, and there's various issues that are in conflict, that have become in conflict the last few years, which hadn't been before then, and there's things of conflict that happens in any democracy. And of course, Israel is a little bit different because Israel is a Jewish country. It tries to run things according to Judaism, and because of that, that has to be understood. And so there are certain conflicts that come into that. I'm not Israeli, so I don't talk about that too much. But what it is, we can see, the kinds of things cause animosities and increase, rather than bringing people together, they're trying to divide people apart. Now, we see this kind of action from the very, very beginning of the talk that they give. So let's go start off what it says. The first thing that is said, the person speaking, main speaker, is a woman named Anastasia. She seems to have come from Russia. I don't know much about her bio. I think I found some information, but I haven't had time to prepare it. Maybe later on I'll talk about it. There are a couple other women there. One is obviously Ethiopian background. She talks about that. And another one, I don't know who she's from. Her name isn't there. And then one of Eitan Bar's people at the end speaks. Eitan Bar does not appear on Up at One for Israel is his thing, and he's involved with the video stuff. And some of the material here is an expansion of what actually appears in Eitan Bar's book when he attacks the rabbis. Okay, so the first thing that says it like this. Anastasia starts off by saying that a little warning for what's going on, as if anything that's said there is not something that people can listen to or be whatever. She says, first of all, that the views are not held even by the majority of Orthodox Jews. Well, that brings you a question here. If you're admitting, if you're doing a video, the purpose of which is to attack Orthodox Jews, why are you starting off? Why, if you realize that the majority of people don't do it, don't believe this kinds of stuff, so you know you're going to be attacked by saying, why are you telling me about this rabbi, that rabbi? We don't follow him, and what he's saying is off the wall. Why do you even do it in the first place? What is your purpose of it? It's only to show how much you hate the rabbis. Now, this hatred is unbased. just, if you don't believe me, speak to Dr. Brown. He realizes, although we are in a sense enemies, we fight against each other because I believe that he's teaching things that bring people to hell, and he believes I'm teaching people to hell, teaching people to hell also. But we don't, you don't attack a person's, you don't attack like that. You try and be serious and understand what it is. And so, why is it, if you admit that that's not what people have, why you do it? If you wanted to argue, let's argue about the Tanakh. We could talk about all kinds of, misstatements and misunderstandings that the Christianity has and that you teach yourself, which are false. Many of my shows are going to deal with a lot of that stuff. So why are you doing that? It shows underneath this a certain venomous hatred. Remember we talked before, earlier, that we find that Jews that convert to Christianity, they become the most bitterest enemies of Jewish people themselves. They hate Jewish people. Whatever they say doesn't make a difference. They hate Jewish people itself, whether it's Nicholas Donin, whether it's the first person who came up, the Bishop Melito of Sardis, who came up first accusing Jews of deicide. Okay, there's something in it that makes them want to hate Jewish people for, well, I don't know. Now then she said, of course, this thing's only held by the ultra-Orthodox. The problem, of course, is that she doesn't quote anybody who is considered ultra-Orthodox. The closest may be somebody who is the Sephardic chief rabbi, but he's not Orthodox. This is Sephardim are not Orthodox. Ultra-Orthodox is basically something that deals with Ashkenazim. And it doesn't quote anybody from there. And besides that, while attacking ultra-Orthodox Jews, no, there is one person, Rabbi Elyashiv is actually, would consider Haredi, actually. So, excuse me, there's one person I would consider Haredi. Okay, but everybody else is not really, or the Sephardim, or they have nothing to do with it. But even more than that, while she says that the Orthodox Jews, the majority don't hold it, she brings standard Orthodox texts, Maimonides. Modern Orthodox hold very strongly from Maimonides, even more than the Hasidim, and even more when they bring these texts, we'll see, is very deceptive and libelous, because what they say is not really what's there. Now, but after that, she says another thing, and this is an appeal to secular Israelis, which to me is so hypocritical, it's not even funny. She says that Israel is a progressive country with equal rights for everybody and something like that. Well, the problem is she's an evangelical Christian. She believes in the New Testament literally. Now, there are two problems here. Number one, which I'd like to point out, is while the Haredim have things of morality and stuff like that that are different, they're not pushing in Knesset to change the laws for everybody. They want themselves to be able to keep the things that they do, but they don't push for everybody else to do it. Whereas we know that in America, for example, there's the moral majority, and there's other Christian organizations. Even Mike Brown is involved very strongly in pushing Christian morality on the United States. The United States is considered a Christian country, whereas it's really not the case, but he's trying to push it rather than taking a more libertarian view, which is what most Orthodox do, as Jews say, just leave us alone so we can do what we want. Don't impinge on our religious rights. They actually do impinge on rights in America, and that's what's been transported into Israel. But even more, and this is where the hypocrisy comes in, is one for Israel now saying that they're progressive, that their views correspond with progressive Judaism in America, for example? Let's forget about the political side of it, where they're certainly not in accord with progressive Jews in Israel, or certainly not in America, okay? But let's talk about other things. What about progressive causes? Does the New Testament, which they have, sound very progressive? Let's look at Romans 1, 25, 29. Here's what it says. Okay. Therefore God gave to them the lusts of their hearts to impurity, to degrading their bodies among themselves, because they exchanged the truth about God for a lie, and worshipped and served the Creator rather than the creature rather than the Creator, who is blessed forevermore. For this reason God gave them up to degrading passions. Their women exchanged natural intercourse for unnatural. And in the same way also men, giving up natural intercourse with women, were consumed with passion one for another. Men committed shameless acts with men, and received in their own persons a due penalty for error. Now, this is a very strong case against, homosexual rights and stuff like that. Israel allows it, by the way, and have parades for that. Are you telling me that One for Israel is now going to be marching in the Gay Pride Parade in Tel Aviv or in Jerusalem when it happens? Let's look at one more here. 1 Corinthians 6:10 through 9 and 10. I think 6, 9, and 10, excuse me. Do you not know that wrongdoers will not inherit the kingdom of God? Do not be deceived, fornicators, idolaters, adulterers, male prostitutes, sodomites, thieves, the greedy, drunkards, revelers. Okay, talking about different types of sexual immorality. Do they now approve or not oppose adultery, for example? We're going to see at the end of this, actually, where they bring a quote from the New Testament, which would seem that they do. But if you ask them, they're not against adultery. They're not in favor of adultery. They're not in favor of homosexual activity. They're not progressive in any way. So what is your appeal to not religious Israelis on things that you yourself don't agree with? Why do you do that? Why? I would never say that I'm progressive or even appeal to Israel as a progressive country when I want to talk about something like this, because that's outright hypocrisy. Now, the reason is, as we talked before, why would one Israel do this? What kind of hypocrisy they're trying to produce here? And again, the answer to this is clearly stated in their New Testament. In 1 Corinthians 9, verse 20. This is what I said. To the Jews, I become as a Jew, in order to win Jews. To those under the law, I become as one under the law, though myself am not under the law, so that I might win those under the law. The Israelis who are progressive, they come as progressives. They claim to be progressives when we know that they're not. It's totally fake. It's part of the New Testament teaching. It's the way that they evangelize. It's what they do, but it is fake. Okay, so let's now go to the first quote that they bring here. Now, the first quote that they bring here is from Ovadia Yosef. Ovadia Yosef, for those who don't know, was, until he died, essentially the head of Sephardic Jews in Israel and even around the world. I know Sephardic people in America, that they revered him as the head of Sephardic Jewry in the world. He had been the chief rabbi for Sephardim. Even when he left being chief rabbi for Sephardim, there was a chief rabbi from the Sephardim, but he was more popular, more influential than they were. A phenomenal man. Very knowledgeable. I'm from the Ashkenazim, so things that he say don't affect me. Certain Charedim are not Sephardim, so they didn't. But so his quote is saying this: women need to cook and not learn. There is no wisdom for women except in cooking. Now, what she said was that women should only learn to cook and sew, and they shouldn't learn Torah at all. There's no reason to learn Torah at all. That they're not, in other words, they're incapable of learning Torah. Well, that's certainly not what she said. What he said, and they don't bring what the context is. We don't know for sure what the context is, but if you want, we can actually look into the biblical text itself, and we can see what probably was his context. And the first place to look is, of course, Proverbs, chapter 31. Proverbs chapter 31 is a very important thing. It is a song that every Jewish home sings Friday night, and it's basically, on the simple level, it's basically a song that we sing for our wives, to praise our wives for what kind of women they are, how righteous they are, and how good they are, although there are hidden meanings where we refer to other things also besides that. Now, in it starts off, this is chapter 31, it starts off chapter 10, and it says, an accomplished woman, I just highlight a good wife, who can find? She's more valuable than pearls. Okay, but it describes exactly what those things are that a good wife is like. A man has a wife that's like that is very good. So in verse 13, it says she seeks wool and flax and her hands work willingly, meaning that she takes things and she does sewing in the home. That's primarily women do that. Men do it sometimes also, but mostly women do that. And something that's very praiseworthy, the ability to do things in the home. That's biblically what it was. Verse 19, she stretches her hand to the distaff and her palms support the spindle. The spindle was also type of sewing. So Avodah Yosef was probably talking about that in the Tanakh, that which women are specifically praised for is in fact their abilities of doing things like sewing and cooking, household type things, as opposed to other things outside. And in fact, there's a very interesting verse in the Tanakh. It's in Exodus chapter 35, 25 and 26. I'd like to read it. Again, I'm going to do it very quickly in English because it goes quick. Every wise-hearted woman spun with her hands, and they brought the spun yarn of turquoise, purple, and scarlet wool and the linen. All the women whose hearts inspired them with wisdom spun with goat hair. But it's talking about when it came to building the tabernacle, there were things that had to be made from cloths and stuff like that. And it was the women with their wisdom, this is what the Torah is actually praising them, the women who were knowledgeable of how to do it, who did it. Didn't say all the women, by the way. So if Anastasia is incapable of sewing on a button on her shirt and her husband has to do it to her, I don't know if she's married yet, but of course, as we pointed out before, that in order to be saved, she has to have children, so I assume she would get married. She wouldn't have children without marriage. Now, there is no specific verse that says they're not allowed to learn. Nobody says that she can't learn. No verse says that a woman is not capable of learning things. In fact, Avodah Yosef has schools for women. Sephardim has Sephardic schools for girls that they go to, and they actually learn things. They learn, Jewish law. They learn Tanakh. They learn things they have to learn to. So obviously, there's nothing that Avodah Yosef would say that women can't do it or shouldn't do it, anything like that. That's absolutely wrong. All he seems to be saying is agreeing with in the Tanakh that says those things that the women are praised specifically for those types of things, sewing and the like. Okay. So, I mean, if Anastasia has a problem with that, or she's incapable of sewing, her problem is actually with Hashem and the Tanakh, because Hashem says that's the thing that women are most praised for. Okay, next one is another one. He brings a quote from Avodah Yosef, who agrees with the Baba Sali. Baba Sali, you probably don't know who he is, who was a very big Sephardic Mekibel from Morocco, who was revered by everybody. He wasn't a rabbi in that sense. He was revered. His name was Abba Chatzara. Abba Chatzara is all around now, or for his descendants, grandchildren. So he talks about how there's a very severe punishment for somebody who wears a wig. Now, we talked beforehand about Numbers 5:18, which talks about the woman who was thought to have committed adultery, that she had her hair covered, she opened her hair up. We talked about Rebecca, how she covered herself up. And we also went to Isaiah 3:16-26, that as far as covering the hair, that women used to make their hair beautiful. More than that is, remember, in the New Testament, in 1 Corinthians 11:5-6, remember what it says there, and I'll read it again. But any woman who prays or prophesies with her head unveiled disgraces her head. It is one the same thing to have her head shaved. But if a woman will not veil herself, then she should cut off her hair. But it's disgraceful for a woman to have her hair cut off or to be shaved. She should wear a veil. For a man, and it gives a reason here, that the woman's hair is like a beautification of the woman. And for that reason, she should have her hair covered. Now, it's a little bit different from what we say in Jewish law, that a married woman should cover her hair, which is based on the biblical text Numbers. But in a sense, they understand the fact that covering hair is not such a serious thing. So the difference here is why is the Sephardim, specifically Avodah Yosef, are against the wearing of wigs for a very simple reason. A wig looks like regular hair, so you wouldn't know the difference between the two. So they feel that the covering should be an actual covering and not a wig. In Ashkenaz, in Europe, they did allow wearing a wig. Many Charedim do not wear wigs, but most of them do. My wife wears a wig. No big deal about that. And so it's talking about that, those people violate. What's even more important is to keep in mind this. The New Testament does mention something about covering your hair. So attacking it, even though it might be more with the New Testament recognizes there's a modesty problem with women going with their hair uncovered, and it should be modest to cover it. So that Jewish people do it shouldn't be such a big thing. Okay, you may think that saying you would be punished for it, but we of course know that there should be punished for things. But more than that, how can you complain about the punishment? Let's look what it says in Revelations 21:8. Okay, in 21:8, the punishment seems to be similar. They marched over the bed of the earth. Oops, 28. But as for the coward of the faceless, the polluted, the murderers, the fornicators, sorcerers, idolaters, all liars. Okay, everybody who's done things bad, which would already also say a woman who's Sephardic, who wears a wig, for example. It only applies to Sephardim. It doesn't apply to non-Sephardim. Their place will be in the lake that burns with fire and sulfur, which is the second death. So, Revelation says clearly that people are going to be punished by being burnt in a lake. What's the difference? Why is it okay for Christians in Revelation to say that somebody who violates those things that they're supposed to do goes into the lake of fire, and it's not okay for Vadi Yosef or the Baba Saleh to say, listen, if you're Sephardic and you don't follow what you're supposed to do, that you do go there. It reminds me of a story I heard. There was a rabbi who was on a train in New York, dressed somewhat like me. I won't say the name because I think I know who it is, but I don't want to say the name just because I might be wrong. And he was on the train, and somebody came up, a Jewish person, spoke to him in Yiddish. Actually, it was a Jewish person, said, how could you dress like that? It's such a disgrace. It's a desecration of Hashem's name that a Jew should dress like that. Jews should act that way. It's a disgrace. So the rabbi comes in, sir, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm Amish. This is the way we dress. Amish is our tradition. So the Jewish guy said, oh, I'm very, very sorry. I didn't want to, I don't really want to, I have very great respect and honor for the Amish people that they keep their customs. So the guy asked him this. He said, hey, you wicked person, you. If I was Amish, it's okay for me to go dress traditionally, but for Jewish not to go traditionally, it's not good. Same thing is here. If Jewish religious people say that a punishment for something that was considered sinful is that they should go to suffer in the next world, that's no good. But if Revelation says you're going to burn in a lake of fire, oh, that's fine, it's all fine. The same hypocrisy that we see drips from their mouths when they talk about this. How could you? Drips from the mouth of hypocrisy. The next quote is from a Rabbi Berland. I mentioned Rabbi Berland is one of those people that we don't listen to what he said because he himself acted in ways which are immoral with women. And so he said some very degrading things about women, that they were donkeys, that they had no sense or whatever like that. But we don't listen to that. We're not even allowed to talk to our wives about that. Every young man that gets married is taught what it says in the Talmud, and it appears in Maimonides. And this is what Maimonides says in the laws of marriage of women, the 15th chapter, the 19th law. And therefore our sages commanded that a person should give honor to his wife more than he does for himself. He should care more for the honor of his wife and treat her in a much better way than he does himself. And he should love her as himself. This is what we're taught when we get married on how you're supposed to treat your wife. You're supposed to give her honor. You're supposed to treat her in a very honorable way, and you're supposed to love her. This Rabbi Berland is teaching something that's completely against the halacha. He's somebody who has an influence on a small group, that's true, but what he says has absolutely nothing to do with Judaism, and certainly not Charedim. No matter which group in Charedim you go, they teach you, before you get married, you're taught how to be married life and stuff like that. There's classes they give you, and this is what you're taught. All of us are taught that. I was taught that. Everybody's taught that. And Amish Charedim you're going to find on the internet like this. Okay, then he continues and says also a few other things. You should not cause her to fear you. And you say, you should speak to her pleasantly. And you should not speak to her in like a depressing manner, in like an upset manner. And you shouldn't speak to her angrily. That certainly doesn't agree with what he's saying here. But this is what the law is. This is what Orthodox Judaism, this is what ultra-Orthodox Judaism teaches, what Chassidim teach. It's what we teach all our children. One doesn't call a wife a donkey or anything like that. That's totally unacceptable. Now, as I said, Rabbi Berland is somebody who's outside the fold, so that what he says isn't of value anymore. Now, she continues to say is that actually this is related to a medrash, and that Rabbi Berland obviously learned this from a medrash. Well, this medrash actually she never looked at. At least not looked at the thing. She looked at one verse. And one verse of it says basically this, and I'll say what it is. This is what I heard from a. This is what I heard. The women are not allowed to rule on harua, means to live the words of law. And we shouldn't rely on what they say. Now the problem is there's no context given to you on this. So let me give you what the context is. The context is based on a story. The Medrash Rabbah here is talking about a specific story that appears in the book of Judges, chapter 13. What's the story? This is actually the birth of Shimshon. And what happens here is an angel comes down to Manoach's wife. And the angel instructs Manoach's wife of how she's supposed to live. When she's expecting a baby, and she has to do certain things while she's pregnant, which very interesting to note is that's very modern. We realize modern today that what you eat affects a child that's when a woman's pregnant. That's why women aren't allowed to drink or to smoke, at least in America, aren't supposed to drink or to smoke when they're pregnant because it can affect the child, or people use drugs and stuff like that, which don't expect anybody relates to them. So the story's like this. She hears it, and she comes and tells her husband, "Listen, a man of God came to me." But Manoach didn't listen, didn't believe her. She told him Manoach didn't believe her. So Manoach prayed that he should also have revealed to him this angel, this man of God, and the man of God comes to him. So the Medrash here is explaining about Manoach. What's going through this guy's mind? Why? His wife just told him something. Why doesn't he believe it? So according to this, he says it, he wants to hear it, and he says that. So he continues on about that. He says that I don't rely on her. I want to hear it myself. And he says to himself, I don't believe anything that she says. Maybe she changed what he said. Maybe she added to it. This is Manoach talking. This is not the rabbis talking. This is Manoach talking. I mean, the word sexist pig really comes to my mind thinking about him. He doesn't, because that's not the way it is. In Jewish law, we're not that way. We rely on our wives all the time. I ask my wife things. I rely on what she says. She would tell me something like that. Of course, I would believe her because she's a righteous woman, and I would believe what she said. And in fact, it's unbiblical to even make such a thing like that. You know why? Because God says the exact opposite. Let's go to the book of Genesis, chapter 21, verse 12. Every boy who learns in yeshiva has learned this. Okay, verse 12. Now the background is that Sarah was having problems with Hagar because Hagar had gave birth to a son Yishmael, and Sarah hadn't had any children yet. And so she was having problems with her. And so Sarah tells Abraham to send him away. She gives advice. So what happens is one example of this. Whatever, it says in verse 12, whatever Sarah tells you, heed her voice. God tells him specifically, listen to your wife. The Talmud also tells us there are things we should always listen to our wives about. Whatever she tells us to do, certain things we always listen to our wives. There's nothing about not listening to wives. And in this medrash itself has nothing to do with, it's not in Jewish law. It's not saying we don't believe in Jewish law. You can look for the Rambam, Shulchan Aruch, everywhere. There's no place you can find it. It's the words of the sexist pig, Menoach, in the medrash. But we don't accept it. Just because the rabbis say somebody says that, doesn't mean. If I would quote something that the New Testament says that Satan says, does that mean that that's what you believe in doing? No. The medrash is talking about totally ripped out of context. The moral of the medrash is actually the opposite. That you should actually listen to your wife. Your wife knows what she's talking about. She is holier than you because the angel came to her, not to you. She's better than you. I wonder if Israel recognizes. The Torah says that, in fact, she was better than you. That's why the Talmud tells us that women have a certain level of bina, that's better than men. Bina is a level from prophecy. They have a better than men. That's what's going on. She didn't know that. Really what this is, it's a scurrilous libel against Judaism and the rabbis. Something taken totally out of context. Totally ripped out of the context what's there. Okay, I'm going to take a couple minute break, and we will start off. We will continue again with more choice gems from their scurrilous video. Okay, William, let's take a break a couple minutes.
Okay, sounds good. Very good. My wife just came in to join us.
Say hello to your wife.
She says hi back. Very cool. Okay. All right, you guys sit tight.
I can, of course, send regards to your wife to you, because we see that's exactly what the angels did to Abraham to his wife. They asked Abraham to give regards to his own wife.
I was just telling Chris, that's probably where they got the idea for their idea of the virgin birth. You know, an angel came to Mary and said she was with child. And so, crazy.
Okay, let's take a few minute break, and I'll prepare for the next few things.
Okay, that sounds good. And so we'll be back shortly, guys. Y'all sit tight. See you all in a few.
חשוב